Minji traced the worn edges of the 2 crumpled dollar bills in her pocket as she sat in the corner booth of the small diner. The familiar sounds of clinking dishes and muted conversations created a comforting backdrop, though she couldn't see the faces of the other patrons. 24 years old today, and this was how she would celebrate, alone, with barely enough money for a simple meal. The waitress approached with gentle footsteps. "What can I get you, honey?" Minji smiled softly, her fingers still clutching the money. "Just coffee and toast, please." The words came out steadier than she felt. She had learned long ago to mask her struggles behind a calm demeanor. "That's all. It's pretty cold outside tonight." "That's perfect, thank you." As the waitress walked away, Minji pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. The heating in her tiny studio apartment had been cut off 3 days ago, and she had spent her last savings on the medication her doctor insisted she needed. Her guide dog, Lucky, pressed against her legs under the table, offering silent comfort. At the table behind her, she heard the rustle of expensive fabric and the quiet tap of fingers on what sounded like a tablet. A man's voice, deep and controlled, spoke in hushed tones about stock prices and merger deals. The contrast between their worlds felt vast, yet somehow, sitting in this small diner, they shared the same space. Minji closed her eyes, though the gesture was meaningless, and made a birthday wish. Not for sight. She had stopped wishing for that years ago, but for hope, for a sign that tomorrow might bring something different than the endless struggle of today. The coffee arrived, warming her cold hands through the ceramic mug. Kang Do-hyun lowered his phone and found himself inexplicably drawn to the young woman sitting alone in the corner booth. He had come to this modest diner to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his penthouse and the endless stream of business associates who only saw dollar signs when they looked at him. Here, nobody knew he was the CEO of Kang Industries. Something about her posture caught his attention. The way she held herself with quiet dignity, despite her obvious circumstances. Her clothes were clean but worn, mended carefully in places. When she had ordered just coffee and toast, he noticed the slight hesitation in her voice, the way her fingers seemed to count something in her pocket. The guide dog at her feet made everything clear. She was blind, alone, and from what he could observe, struggling financially. Yet there was something luminous about her, an inner strength that seemed to radiate from within. Do-hyun had built his empire through calculated decisions and strategic thinking, but tonight, impulse overtook logic. He signaled the waitress discreetly. "The young lady in the corner booth," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "I'd like to pay for her meal, and please bring her whatever she'd like from the menu. Tell her it's a birthday special from the house." The waitress looked puzzled. "How did you know it was her birthday?" Do-hyun paused, realizing he had somehow sensed it rather than known it. Lucky guess. As the waitress approached Minji's table with an expanded menu, Do-hyun watched the confusion and then cautious hope cross her delicate features. He found himself leaning forward, invested in her reaction in a way that surprised him. For the first time in years, his wealth felt like it might serve a purpose beyond accumulating more wealth. Minji's hands trembled slightly as the waitress explained about the birthday special. Her heightened senses, developed through years without sight, told her this was no standard restaurant policy. The waitress's voice carried a note of conspiracy, and there was an unfamiliar warmth in the offer. "I don't understand," Minji whispered. "How did you know it was my birthday?" "Sometimes the universe just knows these things," the waitress replied gently. "So what would you really like to eat?" Minji felt tears threatening to fall. She hadn't experienced such unexpected kindness in so long that she had almost forgotten how it felt. Lucky shifted beside her, sensing her emotional state. Could I have the bibimbap and maybe some tea?" "Of course, sweetheart, anything else?" "That's already too much." "Thank you." As the waitress left, Minji tried to compose herself. She knew someone in the restaurant had orchestrated this act of generosity, but who and why? Her parents had died in the accident that took her sight 5 years ago, and she had no other family. Friends had slowly drifted away as her circumstances became more difficult. Behind her, she heard the quiet stranger shifting in his seat. His presence had been constant since she arrived, and now she wondered if he might be connected to this mysterious gift. The thought both warmed and terrified her. She wasn't used to accepting help from others, having learned early that dependence often led to disappointment. When the food arrived, the rich aromas made her realize just how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. As she took her first bite, she whispered a quiet thank you to whoever might be listening, both to the unknown benefactor and to whatever force had brought this moment of grace into her difficult world. Lu Hyun found himself unable to return to his business calls as he watched Min-ji savor her meal. Each careful bite seemed to bring her genuine joy, and he realized how long it had been since he had witnessed someone appreciate something so simple yet essential. In his world of excess, nothing held such pure value. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if trying to make the experience last. Her guide dog remained perfectly still beside her, trained and devoted. The bond between them was evident in small gestures, the way she occasionally rested her hand on the dog's head, the way the animal seemed to anticipate her needs. His phone buzzed with urgent messages from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting, but for once, Do-hyun ignored the corporate demands. Something about this moment felt more important than stock portfolios and merger negotiations. When Min-ji finished eating, she sat quietly for several minutes, her hands wrapped around the warm teacup. Her expression held a serenity that he envied. Despite her obvious struggles, she possessed something he had lost years ago in his climb to the top, the ability to find contentment in simple moments. As she prepared to leave, carefully counting out money for a tip, despite having received the meal for free, Do-hyun made an impulsive decision. He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Min-ji's head turned slightly at the sound, her trained ear catching the movement. For a moment, their worlds seemed to pause in the small diner. He wanted to approach her, to somehow bridge the gap between their vastly different lives, but uncertainty held him back. Instead, he watched as she gathered her coat and gently commanded her dog to guide her toward the exit. As they passed his table, she paused briefly, as if sensing his attention, then continued on into the cold night. The next morning, Min-ji discovered something unexpected in her coat pocket, a business card she didn't remember receiving. Her fingers traced the embossed lettering as her neighbor, elderly Mrs. Park, read it aloud during their morning tea routine. Kang Do-hyun, Chief Executive Officer, Kang Industries, Mrs. Park read, her voice rising with surprise. Min-ji, do you know who this is? This is one of the richest men in Seoul. Min-ji's heart skipped. That's impossible. I've never met anyone like that. The card feels expensive, dear. Real quality paper, raised letters. This isn't something someone just hands out casually. Min-ji tried to recall every moment from the previous evening. Had someone slipped the card into her coat pocket at the diner, the mysterious benefactor who had paid for her meal? Could it have been him? There's a handwritten note on the back, Mrs. Park continued. It says, "Thank you for reminding me what's truly valuable. If you ever need anything, please call." It's signed with just the initial D. The card felt warm in Min-ji's hands, as if it carried more than just contact information. She thought about the stranger she had sensed behind her at the diner, the quiet presence that had seemed both powerful and somehow lonely. "What should I do?" she asked Mrs. Park. "That depends, dear. What does your heart tell you?" Min-ji considered this. Her practical mind warned her about accepting help from wealthy strangers, but something deeper whispered that this connection might be different. The note suggested she had given him something in return, though she couldn't imagine what a struggling blind woman could offer someone who seemingly had everything. Lucky nuzzled against her leg, as if sensing her internal debate. "Maybe," she said quietly. "I should trust that sometimes good things can happen for no reason at all." 3 days passed before Minji found the courage to make the call. Her small apartment felt even smaller as she paced the familiar path from her bed to the tiny kitchen, the business card clutched in her hand. Lucky watched patiently from his corner, understanding her nervous energy. Finally, she dialed the number. "Kang Industries, Mr. Kang's office," a crisp female voice answered. I'm calling for Mr. Kang. This is Minji." A pause. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "He gave me his card. At least I think he did." Another pause, longer this time. "Please hold." The waiting made her hands shake. She almost hung up twice, but something kept her on the line. "Minji?" The voice was unmistakably the same one she had heard behind her at the diner, deep, controlled, but now carrying a note of genuine surprise. "I wasn't sure you would call." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I still don't understand why you... Are you free this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Nothing complicated," he added quickly, seeming to sense her hesitation. "Just coffee, public place, you can bring your dog." "I don't know if that's wise. We're very different people, Mr. Kang." "Do Hyun," he corrected gently. "And maybe that's exactly why we should talk." Minji found herself agreeing to meet at a small cafe near the university district. Neutral territory, she hoped. After hanging up, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake or finally allowing something good to enter her carefully guarded world. Mrs. Park knocked on her door an hour later. "I heard you on the phone, dear. Whatever you're planning, wear the blue sweater, it brings out your eyes." Do-hyun arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner table where they could speak privately. He had cancelled 2 important meetings for this encounter, a decision that would have seemed incomprehensible to him just a week ago. His assistant had looked at him as if he had lost his mind. When Minji entered with Lucky, Do-hyun felt the same inexplicable pull he had experienced at the diner. She moved with quiet grace, her trust in her guide dog absolute and beautiful to witness. She wore a soft blue sweater that indeed brought out her eyes, and he found himself wondering if she had any idea how lovely she was. "Minji!" He stood as they approached. She turned toward his voice, her expression cautiously hopeful. "Do-hyun, thank you for coming. Please sit wherever you're comfortable." As she settled into her chair, Lucky positioning himself protectively beside her, Do-hyun studied her face. Without the dim lighting of the diner, he could see the subtle signs of hardship, the slight thinness that spoke of missed meals, the careful way she held herself as if prepared for disappointment. "I should thank you again for the meal," she said, "but I still don't understand why." "Honestly, neither do I, completely." He leaned forward slightly. "I've spent the last 10 years focused entirely on business, on building wealth and power. But watching you that night, seeing how you found joy in something so simple, it reminded me of who I used to be before all of this." Minji tilted her head, listening not just to his words, but to the subtle inflections in his voice. "And who were you before?" "Someone who believed kindness mattered more than profit margins." She was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want from me?" The question was direct, honest, and it caught him off guard. "Nothing," he said finally. "Maybe just the chance to remember what that feels like." "I have a proposition for you," Do-hyun said after they had talked for an hour. Their conversation had flowed more naturally than either had expected, moving from cautious pleasantries to deeper subjects with surprising ease. Minji tensed slightly. "What kind of proposition?" "A job. My company is developing new accessibility technologies for the visually impaired." We need a consultant, someone who can provide real-world perspective on what actually works and what doesn't. I'm not qualified for something like that. I don't have business experience or technical knowledge. You have something more valuable, lived experience. You understand the daily challenges in ways our engineers never could. Do-hyun leaned forward. The pay would be substantial, enough to change your circumstances significantly. Minji's hands stilled on Lucky's fur. The offer was everything she needed: financial stability, meaningful work, a chance to help others facing similar challenges. But it felt too good to be true, too much like charity dressed up as opportunity. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "There must be other people who could do this better." "Because," Do-hyun said, his voice carrying an honesty that surprised even him, "in one evening you taught me more about resilience and grace than I've learned in 10 years of business school and boardroom meetings. Because when I watched you count those $2 and still tip the waitress, I realized I had forgotten what real strength looks like. And if I say no, then I hope we can still be friends. This offer isn't conditional on anything except your willingness to help make technology more accessible." Minji was quiet for several minutes, her internal debate visible in the subtle changes of her expression. Lucky sensed her emotional state and pressed closer to her legs. "When would I start?" she asked finally. Do-hyun smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Whenever you're ready." Minji's first day at Kang Industries felt surreal. The building's lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, filled with the hushed efficiency of serious business. Do-hyun met her personally, guiding her through the maze of elevators and corridors to a comfortable office that had been specifically prepared for her needs. "Everything has been designed with accessibility in mind," he explained, showing her the specialized computer equipment, the tactile markers, and the clear pathways. "But if anything isn't right, we'll change it." The team of engineers welcomed her with genuine curiosity rather than the pity she had learned to dread. They asked thoughtful questions about her experiences with various technologies, taking detailed notes as she demonstrated both the successes and failures of current accessibility tools. "The voice recognition software stops working the moment there's background noise," she explained during her first presentation. "And most navigation apps assume you can see landmarks they're describing." Dr. Kim, the lead engineer, nodded thoughtfully. "We never considered the background noise issue. That's incredibly valuable feedback." As the days passed, Minji found herself energized by work in a way she had never experienced. Her input was valued, her insights sought after, and for the first time in years, she felt truly useful. The generous salary allowed her to move to a better apartment, one with reliable heating and enough space for Lucky to be comfortable. But beyond the professional satisfaction, she was increasingly aware of Do-hyun's presence in her daily life. He checked on her progress personally, often bringing her tea during long meetings, always ensuring she had everything she needed without making her feel like a charity case. The line between professional and personal was beginning to blur in ways that both excited and frightened her. "You've been avoiding me," Do-hyun said one evening as he found Minji working late in her office. The building was nearly empty, the usual bustle replaced by the quiet hum of night-cleaning crews. Minji looked up from her braille notes, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I've been busy with the accessibility audit. That finished 2 days ago." He settled into the chair across from her desk. "Minji, have I done something wrong?" The gentle concern in his voice made her chest tighten. Over the past month, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper, more complicated. She had begun looking forward to their daily check-ins, storing up small details about his life from their conversations. But the growing intimacy scared her. "Nothing's wrong," she said quietly. "I just think we should keep things professional." "Why?" The simple question hung between them. Minji struggled to articulate fears that felt both rational and foolish. Because this feels like a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't happen to people like me. People like you? Poor, blind, damaged. Do-hyun was quiet for so long, she wondered if he had left. When he finally spoke, his voice was closer, as if he had moved to sit on the edge of her desk. Min-ji, look at me. I can't look at you. That's the point. Yes, you can. Not with your eyes, but with everything else. What do you see when you really pay attention? Despite herself, she turned toward him, using the senses that had become finely tuned over the years. She heard the slight irregularity in his breathing, caught the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with coffee and stress. His presence felt solid, warm, and somehow sad. I see someone who has everything but feels empty, she whispered. And I see someone who has almost nothing but feels complete. Which one of us is really damaged? The revelation that Do-hyun and Min-ji were working closely together created ripples throughout Kang Industries. The board members whispered about the CEO's charity case, while gossip magazines began running stories about the mysterious blind woman who had captured the attention of Seoul's most eligible bachelor. Min-ji first learned about the media attention when Mrs. Park called her in distress. There are reporters outside your building, dear. They're asking questions about you and Mr. Kang. The fairy tale was crumbling. Min-ji sat in her office, processing the reality that their connection was now public entertainment. She had always known their worlds were too different, but she had allowed herself to believe that somehow love might bridge that gap. When Do-hyun arrived, his usual calm composure was strained. I'm handling this. My legal team is issuing cease and desist orders, and security is managing the reporters. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Min-ji said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've become a liability to you, to your company. You're not a liability. You're... What? What am I, Do-hyun? Your good deed? Your way of proving you're not just another cold businessman? The words cut deeper than she intended, and she immediately regretted them, but the fear and overwhelm made rational thought difficult. Is that really what you think? His voice carried a hurt she had never heard before. I don't know what to think anymore. This morning I was anonymous. Now there are photos of me in newspapers, stories about my parents' accident, speculation about our relationship. I never wanted any of this. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do? I think, Min-ji said, her heart breaking with each word, I should resign, go back to my old life where I belong. And us? There is no us. There can't be. 2 weeks without Min-ji felt like 2 years. Do-hyun threw himself into work with the same intensity he had shown before meeting her, but everything felt hollow. The accessibility project continued under Dr. Kim's leadership, but it lacked the insight and passion that Min-ji had brought to it. He found himself driving past her old apartment building, hoping for a glimpse of her walking lucky. The few times he saw her, she looked as lost as he felt. The vibrant woman who had challenged his engineers and laughed at his awkward jokes seemed diminished, smaller somehow. Min-ji, meanwhile, struggled to readjust to her previous life. The financial security from her brief employment had improved her circumstances, but the emotional emptiness was profound. She missed the intellectual stimulation of the work, the sense of purpose, and most of all, Do-hyun's presence in her daily life. Mrs. Park watched her young neighbor with growing concern. You're wasting away, dear. Whatever you're protecting yourself from, it can't be worse than this. He's better off without the complications I bring, Min-ji replied, though the words felt hollow. And are you better off without him? The question haunted her. In trying to protect both of them from the challenges their relationship would face, had she actually destroyed something precious and irreplaceable? Do-hyun facing similar doubts, finally made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He called an emergency board meeting and announced his intention to step down as CEO, effective immediately. "The company will be better served by new leadership," he told the stunned board members. "I've lost perspective on what truly matters." By evening, news of his resignation was spreading through Seoul's business community. The same reporters who had once hounded Min-ji were now scrambling to understand why one of the country's most successful young executives was walking away from his empire. Min-ji learned about Do-hyun's resignation from Mrs. Park, who heard it on the evening news. The shock of it sent her reeling. Whatever she had expected him to do, abandoning his life's work wasn't it. "He's lost his mind," she whispered, pacing her small apartment with Lucky following anxiously. 3 hours later, a knock at her door interrupted her spiral of guilt and confusion. Lucky's tail wagged, recognizing the visitor before she opened the door. "Do-hyun, what have you done?" "What I should have done weeks ago." His voice was different, lighter somehow, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I chose what matters. Your company matters. Your employees, your responsibilities, you matter more." The simple statement stopped her protests. She stepped back, allowing him to enter the modest apartment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fairy tales not happening to people like you. But what if this isn't a fairy tale? What if it's just two people who found something real in a world full of pretense?" Min-ji sank into her chair, overwhelmed. "You can't just give up everything for me." "What if this doesn't work? What if we're too different? Then we'll figure it out together, or we'll fail together. But I'd rather fail trying to build something real than succeed at something empty." Do-hyun knelt beside her chair, his presence warm and solid. "I'm not asking you to be someone you're not or to fit into my old world. I'm asking if we can build a new world together. The media attention, the scrutiny, will fade. Money and power make for temporary headlines. Love is quieter, but it lasts longer." Min-ji reached out hesitantly, her fingers finding his face. She traced the familiar lines, feeling the tension that had been present for weeks, finally beginning to ease. "Are you sure about this? Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." 6 months later, Min-ji stood in the sunny kitchen of their modest apartment, listening to Do-hyun read applications for their non-profit foundation. They had used his considerable wealth to establish an organization focused on accessibility technology and support services for the visually impaired community. "This application is interesting," he said, reviewing the papers over morning coffee. "A young woman in Busan wants to develop audio navigation for public transportation. She lost her sight in a car accident 2 years ago." "Sounds familiar." Min-ji smiled, remembering her own journey. "Let's fund it." Their relationship had evolved into something neither had expected, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and quiet daily intimacy. Do-hyun had discovered that true satisfaction came not from accumulating wealth, but from using resources to create meaningful change. Min-ji had learned to trust that love didn't always come with conditions or expiration dates. The media attention had indeed faded, replaced by admiration for their foundation's work. Business colleagues who had initially questioned Do-hyun's decision now sought his advice on corporate social responsibility. Lucky padded into the kitchen, followed by their newest addition, a guide dog puppy they were training for another visually impaired recipient. The apartment that had once felt too small for Min-ji alone now somehow accommodated their growing family comfortably. "Do you ever regret it?" Min-ji asked, leaning against the counter where Do-hyun sat. "Giving up the corporate life?" He set down the applications and pulled her into his arms. "I didn't give up anything important. I traded a lonely penthouse for a home. I traded meaningless wealth for purposeful work. I traded isolation for love. "And I traded $2 and desperation for more happiness than I thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. Outside their window, Seoul hummed with its usual energy. But inside their small apartment, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued building something beautiful from the most ordinary moments. Their love story had never been a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real.